Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another interview on the JayBee and Milly channel. I am JayBee, and of course joining me is Milly.
Hi.
And the special guest who'll be interviewing today is Brynn Metheney. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So people that are watching this will probably recognize your name from the credits of the Scoob movie, but you've also been involved in a lot of other really cool and interesting projects. But going back towards the start, at least according to IMDb, your first role as like a concept artist, illustrator was in 2014. But before that point, what was your kind of process for getting there?
Well, I started in film around 2011 on a film called Valerian by Luc Besson. City of a Thousand Planets, I think, was the tagline to that film, and that came about sort of randomly. I had made a senior thesis about creature design and world building, and one of Luc's assistants for his recruiting team for that film saw my work and reached out to me, and I was able to work on the film. It was my very first film job, which that doesn't ever happen. It was kind of this out of the blue, like introduction into Hollywood. So I worked on that movie, and then I didn't get another film job until 2014, really until I started working on Scoob. And Bother You might have been the other one that happened during that time. So yeah, that was kind of how I got my crazy little start into this. I was working on other projects in publishing and the tabletop role playing scene with Dungeons and Dragons and all that kind of stuff. So I think some of my work had been out there for a little bit, and that was kind of how I snuck my way into film.
That's incredible. And in terms
Yeah.
of maybe inspirations or influences, like, was there a particular movie or TV show or even artist that you were familiar with growing up or before your career that you feel inspired you to go down that path?
I definitely was very inspired by Jurassic Park. I remember seeing that movie as a kid in theater and being just awestruck by it. Of course, Star Wars was a big inspiration as well. I saw that quite young. My father was both my parents actually were really big sci-fi fantasy nerds and loved to show me movies like Alien, Terminator, Star Wars, and other movies like that. Probably too young, but I'm grateful for it. I loved it. So, but it was really Jurassic Park where I was like, oh my gosh, that's definitely something I'd like to do one day. So
That's amazing. I think certainly, I know it was kind of for you growing up, especially, you really, loved Jurassic Park, didn't you? And
Oh, yeah.
it's so impressive as well. And I guess kind of we were speaking about inspiration there, and I guess kind of some of the main audience that watch these interviews are people that take inspiration from the guests that we have on, because they, really aspire towards the professions that that the people we interview have. And so with that in mind, is there any advice you have for, people that are looking to get into illustration or concept art?
yeah, I think really having, let's see, in terms of creature design, which is kind of what I focus on, I think drawing from nature is really important. So if you're interested in doing creature design, draw as many animals as you can, be fascinated by them, read about them, learn about them. They have such a wealth of knowledge and ideas in their just perfect design. And the evolution of this planet is such a fascinating story that I think all artists kind of draw from, but particularly in creature and animal stuff, like always look there. And I think also another thing I would focus on is learning to pitch a story, learning to talk about your work, learning to be excited about the stories that you're telling. I think that so much of art right now, especially in entertainment, can be kind of let's see, like industry standard, right? But what makes us stand out, and I think some of that is story and style and what your personal tastes are. Bring yourself into it is what I'm trying to say. I think like bringing your own personal history or your identity into something is really important right now in art. So
And expanding on like the theme of, the personal identity and personal preferences, when we've spoken to, other creature designers, I guess, in the past, quite often they have a preferred type of monster. So, the people that could say that they could make a whole entire book just full up of different types of werewolves. So, is there a particular type of creature, or I guess, almost like amphibious or hairy or any of that sort of type of creature that you say you prefer to work on?
I love that question because I think that in the creature community, there's definitely people who were like horse girls growing up or like dinosaur kids or whatever, and it's very apparent. I was definitely a dinosaur horse girl, so predators, but I also really love ungulate animals, hooved animals, but in particular, like, pudgy hooved animals like tapirs or pigs or goats and stuff like that. I actually have goats, so
Oh.
I love them, so I'm kind of obsessed with their forms and how they're very muscular. Like horses are a good one too. Muscular, but also round, and like every shape imaginable is contained within some of these animals, and they're just always fun to draw. So a lot of my creature like fun time sketching typically has some kind of round pudgy belly with a like kind of meaty hooves and some sort of snout going on. Those are my favorite things to draw.
Oh wow, perfect. That sounds absolutely amazing. And we are excited to get onto some of the projects that you've worked on in a little bit more detail. And one of which, kind of while we're on the, conversation of creatures, is Men in Black International, which I think it's fair to say had quite a few. So what's the experience working on that like?
That project was interesting. It was actually all based in London. So I was on London time working in Los Angeles, so my hours were really strange. And I was mostly in contact with the visual effects supervisors for that project. So sometimes, depending on the project, I'll be in touch directly with the art director, the director, the production designer, or the VFX supervisor, or all of the above, any combination. But for this particular one, I had a very specific contact. She was great, and we hit it off. But mostly, the project was very freeform. They were kind of like, just draw as much as you can, draw whatever you want. We just have this big, black market scene that unfortunately I don't even think made it into the film really. But they had all these ideas, like the space for creatures, and so they wanted kind of like a whole scene of all of these different animals being kept in cages and like kind of exotic looking aliens from other worlds. And so it was a great opportunity for me to just kind of have fun and also do a bit of writing. I love writing for my concepts, and kind of interjecting story here and there just so the crew can have something to jump off of if they want. Just with extra flavor, So it was a really fun experience. It was about 3 weeks long, so not a very long one, but a very intense one. So
It is incredible. I do remember something to do with a black market scene, but I think they moved the location possibly to either the Men in Black headquarters, or I think even like a bar they went into at some point on that quest, perhaps. But there's just such
yeah.
a variety of aliens, of course, given the concept that space is infinite, it's ever expanding. I think there's such a cool variety that you managed to design that, of course, you showcased on your website. And so I'm curious to know, to what extent were you given a pitch like, we want 5 four-legged animals, 1 two-legged animal, or was it just, okay, let your imagination run wild and come back to us with what you make?
Yeah, it was very much just let it run wild, which was kind of one of those dream projects. Typically, I get a very specific, perimeter to work with. Some of the other characters in Men in Black, like Luca or Pawnee, those characters were kind of already figured out in different either stages of their life, or in Pawnee's case, he is exactly the design that you see in the movie, but they wanted my interpretation on it. I think just to check to see if they'd checked all their bases and to see if it was the design they loved. So they asked a few artists to throw in their interpretation of the character too. So black market stuff, it was very much just have at it, have fun, and those are always sometimes the best projects, but also some of the most terrifying because you don't know if you're going to hit the mark or not. You're just kind of shooting in the dark. So it's one of those things. It's like, well, I hope you like what I'm, coming up with, and let's see what happens. So it's a mixed bag.
I could definitely imagine, especially with such a big project as well. And potentially, I'm moving on to a bit of a nerdy question now because this is something that I just let my mind personally run wild with. And so, looking through your website, one of my favorite designs that you did for Men in Black was the tiger striped creature. And I do apologize. I know the name is there, but I'm not brave enough to try and
It's okay.
pronounce it. But a really interesting creature. And I got thinking to myself, is there ever a moment where you look at this creature and of course you've got the designs and that's what you're there to do, but do you ever imagine like, okay, so this alien is going to be from a planet with this type of temperature or this kind of climate and this is why they've evolved that way, or like how deep into that backstory do you go with some of these designs?
I definitely think about what sort of environment the creatures are coming from. For that particular creature, I was wanting to design something that looked scary right up front, where the use of tiger stripes immediately invokes in the audience, oh, it must be like a tiger because there's tiger stripes on it. So you can use some of these signifiers to kind of help your audience guess a little bit about the character before the character even moves or talks or anything. Similar with the alien also featured on that page. It's kind of the orangutan looking bird creature. I definitely pulled a lot from orangutans, thinking that my audience would think, oh, it must be a tree climber because it's built like one. So with this tiger-like creature, I'm thinking of something that's fast, agile, maybe predatory or just aggressive. So the way it's built, its stance, it feels like a predator. But the joke is that it's like good with children, like they're used as babysitters a lot of the time. And I thought about some of these large breed dogs that humans have used for hundreds of years to kind of guard families and guard children, and you see them in royal paintings and stuff, this like massive hound that's like amongst children, and it's just funny because it's a very predatory animal. It could like kill everybody in that scene, but it doesn't because it's been bred to be that way. So I kind of thought it would be a funny way to showcase this like big creature that walks out, and then they're like, oh yeah, this is the so and so, and it's actually a good babysitter. That kind of thing might be kind of funny. So always thinking for little bits of story and all that. It was a great question.
Thank you. And it's interesting you say that because those types of like subversions of expectations even happen in species that we see today. So, for instance, I don't know where I read this, so this could actually be nonsense, but my family had a pet Shih Tzu, and it's the most hateful, spiteful creature in the world. It always growls at me, but then it can't walk up the stairs properly. It's a bit clumsy. But then I read somewhere that there were like statues of them erected outside old temples because they were like these guardians of these temples. And so I'm kind of like, oh, well, you really wouldn't expect that. Maybe you get like a Dalmatian in there or a Great Dane or something like that.
Right.
But those subversions of expectations are always fun to explore. But like I say, I loved everything that I saw on the website. But in terms of what I possibly didn't see, is there ever, and this could apply to Men in Black International or any project you've worked on, have there ever been something that you've designed and you've decided to not submit it or not show it? And if you have, what is the defining factor of something that you do submit versus something that you don't submit?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of self-editing as you're working when it comes to media like this. Some of it is sometimes I've made ideas that I just don't think the director is going to connect with. Like it might just be too outlandish. It might be too weird, or maybe doesn't hit the right tone, and so I will just cast it aside and kind of be like, okay, next one. You kind of build up on your own concepts as you're working on projects like these. Another reason I've definitely not submitted stuff is because I liked the idea and I wanted to keep it for myself, which might be a little selfish, but in Hollywood you don't own anything you make, really. It's all belongs to the studio, and so if you really do have a precious idea, you should keep it close to your heart because they will absolutely take it from you. So you have to just think about that a little ways. It's rare that it happens, but there's definitely been moments where I've maybe designed a face a certain way, or maybe come up with a character, and I've been like, well, I'm going to change that just a little bit, or I'm going to try again just because I actually really like this guy and he's going to live over here in my corner so I can use him again later. So those are some reasons.
That's really interesting. I guess I'd never thought about it that way. I guess, like you said, I thought about, perhaps what you thought would be a good fit for the kind of episode, but like you say, kind of like surrounding factors as well is something to really think about. And so again, there's another project that we're excited to touch upon, because I know it's something that we went to see, you know, as soon as we could in like cinemas and everything, which is Ghostbusters Afterlife. I know JayBee was counting down the days till this project, because, you know, the originals were just so impressive. They were a huge part of our growing up, and so, you know, it was something we were really excited to see. And with that being said, like we said, you know, there was some original characters that were called back that you know, some of which you went to work on, which was, you know, for one being the Terror Dog. What was it like for you working on that? Because obviously, you know, it was something that had been established, and sometimes it's a creative thing and you kind of get given no brief. With this, I imagine, you know, there was something that was kind of like, okay, I need to kind of work with this a little bit.
Yeah, Ghostbusters is by far one of my favorite projects I've gotten to work on. That team was amazing. Jason Reitman is an incredible director, very collaborative. He was in the office like every day with us, you know, hanging out. He was just a very personable guy. The whole team, my production designer Francois Audouy was great. So it was very scary to work on that project because it was such a wonderful cast of people involved, and also it has such a big legacy, and Ghostbusters in particular is a very loyal fan base, that is just, you know, diehard Ghostbusters. They're very, very wonderful, kind people, but I didn't want to disappoint them. So when I was redesigning the Terror Dog, we kept it very close to what the original looked like in terms of silhouette and color and all these things. But there were certain things that I took into account when redesigning it that were very important. And the biggest thing was anatomy. We needed that thing to be able to run around like an actual dog. And in the original films, it mostly was sitting, or it kind of like hopped down the road in as a state as a stop motion character. And Jason really wanted this thing to feel like a big dog monster that could just like rip through the street and kind of charge down, you know, the highway like a bull. So I had to kind of reconstruct the whole body while also making sure that it still felt very similar to the original in proportion. But if you look at both of those creatures, the 86 Terror Dog and the 2020, well, we called it 2020 because it was supposed to come out then, but it was like 2021. The recent Terror Dog, very, very different in the way they look, even though like I'm sure everybody's thinking like, oh no, they look exactly the same. It's incredibly different creatures. So there was a lot of legacy and expectation to follow up with, but I knew that if I kept true to that and changed certain things here and there, like the anatomy, also adding some story about like the eyes, the triangles in the eyes, I really wanted to kind of add some depth to the character and give it some lore and some more stuff for fans to get excited about. So I hope that answers the question, but it was very intimidating to touch the Terror Dog.
Well, it's certainly a challenge that you rise to. I think, you know, in terms of the work that you do, when it comes to kind of rising to the pressure of pre-established fan bases and things like that, people tend to be really quite happy, because I'm going to say for Scoob as well, which was another huge fan base, so well known, everyone was so happy with Scoob. So what's your kind of thoughts on working on projects like that do have a pre-established fan base? Is it that it's something that you enjoy, kind of the challenge of giving something a new life? Do you kind of prefer starting from scratch and kind of working on projects that you almost don't have a brief for, kind of thing?
You know, that's an interesting question, because I think that, you know, when I think back to Men in Black or Sorry to Bother You, those were very original based projects, and they scratch a different itch where I'm kind of like, okay, I get to really flex some of my like animal anatomy, evolution, you know, fantasy muscles. I can really dig in and just have fun and like do what I do. Whereas I do find a lot of joy problem solving with a box around me. And I think that Scoob and Ghostbusters, you know, scratch that itch where it was like I had to figure out how to make it new and exciting and fun, but also keep it very original to the old guard. And how do I bridge the two while also like fulfilling a little bit of my aesthetic choices and tastes and all that. So I don't know that I prefer one to the other. I think that I, as an artist myself, like in my own personal work, I enjoy making original things. But I have always loved fan art and you know, some of these memorable characters that have been with me since I was a kid. Some of my favorite artists are fan artists and stuff. So, you know, on Twitter and online and stuff. So I'm kind of a in the middle kind of person. I like working both ways.
Well, that's fantastic, and it's just really exciting to even, touch on the topic of Scoob, given that, in that pre-production phase, of course, we're aware that not only was it based around Scooby Doo, but also the wider Hanna-Barbera universe as well, with creatures like Jabberjaw and just the whole entire lineup of Hanna-Barbera characters. So, at the point of you getting hired onto the project, or even before that, how familiar were you with the Scooby franchise and the wider Hanna-Barbera franchise?
You know, I have grown up watching all of those cartoons, so I can't say that I was like a mega fan, but I definitely knew of them. And I grew up watching Scooby. Definitely, I'm thinking of like Snagglepuss, Yogi Bear, some of these other ones that weren't in the film, but you know, I knew Jabberjaw. My mom loved Jabberjaw. Grape Ape, some of these other memorable characters. I always did like Muttley too, because I watched the racers. I can't Wacky Racers and that whole like cartoon series. And Muttley always, when I got to be involved with Muttley, I was really excited because he was always a really cute character to me. I always liked his little laugh, and I just liked his look. He had a cool look. So yeah, I was really excited, and those characters were a big part of my childhood, and kind of they were just always on, you know. So
They certainly were. And ultimately, like you say, it's great to hear, like you say, that it kind of comes full circle where you get to start to work on these projects that you watched growing up when you're wondering what it is you're going to do, and it all brings itself full circle. So in terms of starting on the Scoob project, do you remember how that came about, how you became involved with the movie?
yeah, it was that they found, again, Scoob was one of those like wonderful moments where someone saw my work and just was like, we should bring her on. And I was hired directly by Tony Curvone, who was the first and last director of the film. As the film went on, they kind of shuffled directors around in the production, and kind of got everything. It was kind of crazy for a little bit, but Tony had seen my work and hired me. And I was hired by Real Effects out of Texas. At the time, I was living in Oakland, California, so I was completely remote for that project. And they had brought me on because I was am an animal anatomy expert. So they wanted to approach Scooby with a more anatomical based sense and kind of give him some bones, because they were going to build him in 3D. They wanted him to kind of have some structure to him, a little bit more so than the 2D animation that we all know and love. But the film also was a little darker in the very beginning. It definitely wasn't as kind of close to the cartoon as it is now. It definitely had a little bit more of a grittier vibe to it, which was kind of popular at the time. I'm really glad it didn't go that way, because I think the way it ended up is so beautiful and such a wonderful tribute to the original, and it still has some of that dark themes and stuff, but Scooby always has. It's always been a dark cartoon, but not in the sense of like aesthetic. I think that they made the right choice. So when I was called to work on that, I was really ecstatic, because I'd always wanted to work in animation. Some of my favorite media growing up was animation, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I get to do this. So I was thrilled.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that any one of us would be thrilled, like you say, to work on such a project. And I think, it's really interesting to hear, like you're saying there, about the work that you're doing with Scooby and how to kind of change the form as well, because I know we've had, quite a few people say in the past that have worked on animation for Scooby that initially it was 2D art, you don't think about how it walks, how it moves, and then, like you say, to be the expert, you need to work out how all of a sudden it can do that and be viewed from all these different angles that we probably haven't seen before. So, really quite the challenge there. And I guess my next question, you were saying that Muttley was a character that you were so happy to be working with when you started on the project. When you first signed on, was there any characters from watching Scooby or the other franchises other than Muttley that you were hoping would be the ones that you get to work with?
I did secretly hope that they would include Snagglepuss just because I love cats. But when I saw that they included Dynamite, I was really excited about that because I loved watching Dynamite and the Blue Falcon. I thought that it was such a funny cartoon and just silly, and I loved that they kind of did a little bit of a twist with Dynamite where he's not as goofy crazy, you know, he's a little more serious and kind of like clean cut robot dog. I was really excited to try my hand at that, even though I don't know that I would call myself like a hard surface robot person, but getting into like animal anatomy with robot parts was really fun. And I had a great time working on him. So yeah.
It must have been so interesting, like almost having that contrast of designs where Scooby was going to be a lot more realistic, whereas Dynamite was full, robot dog. So it must have been quite the juxtaposition to deal with those. But in terms of leaning towards making Scooby a bit more realistic, did that involve, referring to the live action movies interpretations or real Great Danes that you see out and about, or was there like other inspirations for going down that path?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We were I think we were very live action version as much as we could. We did use it as a point of reference for the place that we could not go in terms of realism. We didn't want to go that far, but we also wanted to bring a little bit of that realism into Scooby's structure. And a lot of it was looking at real Great Danes. I got footage of someone on the production team knew someone with a Great Dane or something, and so they sent me a few hours of this Great Dane just like walking around and being a Great Dane, which was great. And I dove into my own sources and anatomy books and watched my own videos and stuff, and so I did a lot of studies of just Great Danes, kind of learning their wonky anatomy and their physique, and trying to apply that to Scooby. And it was a wonderful experience because I would come to Tony. I worked directly with Tony and the art director, and we would collaborate. I would send drawings in, and Tony would just kind of, because he had worked on the original animations, he knew Scooby, like he could draw him just, anytime. It was like he knew that character inside and out. So he would come over and kind of draw on top and be like, what if we just pushed it this way? And then I'd be like, okay, what if we did that? That would change the anatomy here. So we did a lot of back and forth drawing to really kind of nail Scooby's, skeleton and bones and musculature and all of that. So
yeah, and with Scooby being such an integral part, I mean, the titular part of, the Scooby Doo gang, the Mystery Incorporated team, a lot of his, design is going to be required to stand there with that lineup of, Fred, Daphne, Velma. And so when you were designing for Scooby at that stage, were you aware of what they wanted the rest of the gang to look like, so to best make him fit that aesthetic?
oh yeah, we had a big portal that we were all part of, kind of a big forum. And so anytime there were updates, you could see the updates. So I did a lot of snooping around and spying on some of the other images. But the director was obviously like, please make sure that we're all looking at each other's work. We want this to feel collaborative and like it belongs in the same space. So we were really trying to keep the characters feeling like they were part of the same world for quite a bit. And I think that like we did push it to a highly, not highly realistic, but we were given Rango as inspiration, the animation Rango. Real Effects had worked on that prior. So that was kind of the direction we were headed. And then we pulled it back into cartoon world more and ended up at this really beautiful place. I think that the final film did end up on. But we were absolutely looking at everyone's work all the time, which is my favorite way to work. I love collaborating with other artists and seeing what they're working on. It gives me a lot of fuel to keep going. So
I think the synchronization was perfect and that all the characters did, like you say, fit together and look like they were from the same world. And I guess kind of more on doing that, I know we were talking about making, Scooby look slightly more kind of human-like. I believe at some point it was kind of discussed that they were going to do the same for Muttley and have him be a bit more human-like than we'd kind of ever seen before. So what was the process like of working on Muttley for you? What kind of stages did it go through and that kind of thing?
Muttley was fun. I have a friend with a terrier. Her name is DeLisle, and she was a big inspiration for Muttley in terms of like the face and the eyes and the scruffiness of what Muttley could look like as a real dog, because Muttley in the cartoon is a little bit of a creature. He's kind of this like little furry gremlin puppy, and he's not really like a dog, like you don't think of a breed when you look at Muttley. So when I started working, I headed into terrier direction immediately, and I also thought, you know, Muttley's going to need to walk around on all fours and also stand up, and what's that going to look like? What's that going to mean for his shoulders? How is that going to affect like him as a character, and you know, will it work? And you know, we did a lot of drawings of dog paws turning into kind of hands, where it was like, okay, for you know, this scene it's a paw, and then now it can hold a bottle, or now it's pushing a button, and what does that look like, to kind of help the Muttley challenge, because he was sort of the dog that could like stand up and pilot a ship really quick, you know, and that's kind of like what. So I don't know many dogs that can do that with their hands, but the in the end, Muttley did kind of go back to his little kind of gremlin creature self, which I'm really excited about. I'm glad that I got to explore him as dog, but I think that in the end, his design is so good and so iconic. He's got that little kind of like bell shape to his body, and he's like hunched over, and his little hands, you know, and he's just the cutest little guy. So it was a challenge, but I'm glad that we got to explore it. And in the end, I'm glad that my designs weren't used, because I think it would have been a little restricted for the character.
I mean, it definitely seemed that there was place for those designs in an interpretation, and it would be interesting to see how that would play out. But I love how Muttley is designed to be, like you say, like with Scooby, for all he doesn't look like a Great Dane. In fact, I think they made him reverse of a Great Dane. You can
Yes.
definitely tell what he was meant to be. But with Muttley, as you say, there could be multiple ways where that character could go. And I had like such a nerd moment when we interviewed Billy West, because he did like the Muttley voice on the
Oh,
Zoom. And I was like, I didn't know where to put myself in that moment. It was just an absolutely crazy situation. But alongside Muttley, of course, we've mentioned there were so many interesting characters. So you've got Jabberjaw and the Grape Ape. In that initial storyline for those characters, do you remember what their roles would have been and what type of situations you'd need to design them to be able to fit towards?
yeah. So in the beginning, the team of Scooby, the Scooby cast mates, was to be sort of like an Avengers assemble, right? Where they all get together and they solve this big mystery and fight this, like, you know, ultimate wacky racer situation. And so Grape Ape and Jabberjaw are taken on, or are added to the team a little later, and are, you know, kind of the brawn behind some of the scenes. So they're big, they're strong, especially Grape Ape because he's enormous. And then Jabberjaw was kind of this, like, you know, sort of this sci-fi element where we were trying to figure out, like, how does Jabberjaw breathe outside of water? Do we give him a helmet? Is that ridiculous? Are we asking too many questions? You know, so it was this really funny process of kind of figuring out their story. And I am ultimately sad that they weren't in it, just because I think it would have been amazing, especially to see an animated Jabberjaw, like with all the texture, and it just would have been so cool to see that. They also thought about having Jabberjaw voiced by a woman, and hold on, her name is blanking. We were going to have her voiced by Michelle McCarthy. I can never remember celebrity names. I'm very bad at it. It's an embarrassing thing about me. But so we were kind of thinking about her as we were designing Jabberjaw, which is really cool. And there were some other characters, some other Hanna-Barbera characters that didn't make it in that we did explore. Adamant was one of them, and that was really, really fun to see. His designs were just the coolest. But it was going to be a little more superhero-y, and then in the end they kind of changed direction, which I think was a good move. Again, it stuck closer to the original spirit of the show, but it was kind of funny to see where they were headed with some of these original characters.
Yeah, it is interesting because they've all been designed so uniquely. I'm just trying to think. Michelle McCarthy, Could you be thinking about Melissa McCarthy, or is there a Michelle
It
McCarthy
is
that
Melissa McCarthy. Oh my God. This is why I'm so bad.
It's okay. I don't know names either. I rely on JayBee for absolutely
No, I was
everything
gonna
when it
let
comes
that
to
continue,
names.
but then I was just like,
No, you're right. It
"Huh,
was
hang on."
Melissa McCarthy. Yes, that is her. The like amazing actress and comedian. Um, I don't know why I always think her name is Michelle, but yes, Melissa. She was the one we were thinking of, or the team was thinking of when we were talking about Jabberjaw, because they thought it would be great to kind of, gender swap a bit. And Jabberjaw is such a fun, like crazy character that we could get away with it. So it was just a great time.
Well, it's just so amazing to hear all the concepts and things that were thrown around, because ultimately I think it's fair to say Scoob was a movie we were waiting a long time for, with different concepts. And I know it was supposed to I think release dates were kind of shifted because of COVID and things like that. I think the release had to be changed from a cinema release and everything. So it's something that we were waiting a long time for. Different things were explored and different concepts. And overall, when the movie was finished and you kind of looked back at everything, was there a favorite character that you got to work on?
Definitely Muttley, definitely Dynamite. Those two were my favorites. Captain Caveman was actually another one that I got to design. And he only shows up for like a minute, but he was one that was given to me kind of last minute. And they were like, we know that you're mostly focused on like the animal characters, but would you want to take a stab at Captain Caveman? Because he's kind of a creature in his own right. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I would love to. So I pretty much, he looks exactly the way I designed him. It was kind of crazy. It was probably the most true to the design character that got into the film. And I just thought he was so funny, and they did a beautiful job on him. So those three were really dear to me. And of course, Scoob. I mean, Scooby's just such a great character. He's so fun to draw and such a sweet, like wonky guy. So it's hard to choose a favorite.
There is a lot of like people in Hanna-Barbera, like the people characters, because like kind of moving away from the creatures a bit, like Penelope Pitstop, you've got Johnny Quest and the Flintstones. Was there ever like any type of character, and it could be a person, it could be a creature, that you didn't get to design for from Hanna-Barbera that you would have really liked to have reinterpret?
Really good question. Maybe like Yogi Bear. I love bears. um, and of course Snagglepuss. I love cats. I just think those characters are so fun. Big predators, that kind of thing. And I love the like silly little collars they wear with like the bow ties and the tie. I just think it's ridiculous. So seeing like a big bear with a little tie on would be pretty fun. So those might be the two that I wished.
I really like that, because it kind of fits with something you were saying at the start as well, about how you'd like to design characters who you think would have like a personality trait have been quite intimidating or scary, and then they have these personalities where he just sits and eats out of picnic baskets and things like that, in the most kind of cheerful and peaceful kind of way imaginable, that they're just completely different from what you'd initially think. So I think, like you said, from the designs you were saying at the start you enjoyed doing, I think Yogi would be a perfect fit for you.
Totally. Maybe I'll have to do fan art of Yogi one day just to try it.
We'd love to see that. And I guess
Yeah.
kind of from working on things overall, from the animation to just kind of interacting with people that you're working with, things like that, do you have a favorite memory from when you were working on Scoob?
Oh gosh. I have a lot of favorite memories, but I think my absolute favorite was, we were getting ready for this big presentation to like the producers, to like make sure that the project is, greenlit 100%. There's always this like, okay, we're in the development phase and we have money to do that. But then there's this point where you have to kind of pitch it again. And it's like, is it going to happen for real? And that moment happened. And it was just like flying colors. They were so excited and so thrilled. And I got an email from the producer on the show, and he sent me the nicest thank you letter I've ever gotten. And it was just like, wow, I feel really like seen and rewarded right now. And like I've worked really hard on this, and it was great that the whole team was really thanked individually. We were all just felt really appreciated, and it was just such a lovely experience to be able to do that. But yeah, the team. And there's one other moment now that I'm thinking about it. It was when we first started, and Tony was like, I have a package of like, not package, but like a folder of all of the original designs from all the Hanna-Barbera cartoons that you can just like look at. And so it was all of these like high-res scans of all of the original designs from the cartoon, and it was just such a treat to pore over those because they're so beautifully simply done. Like they're just Scooby's like 10 lines, and you're like, wow, that's amazing. So those two moments were really great. It was wonderful to get to like look through their archives, and also really great to be recognized as a team and to have our hard work pay off. So
that's incredible. I could not imagine the expression on my face if I'd seen them, how incredible that experience must have been. But yeah, like the Scoob movie is interesting because I think more than a lot of the other movies that were released, it definitely had its, public struggles, of course, really ramping up for release right as the pandemic hit. In fact, I'm pretty much sure that it is the first it was the first movie to have switched from a cinematic release to, video on demand release. So to that end, when it did come out, did you get a chance to see it? And if so, what did you kind of make of the final version?
I did. I got to watch it with my family, which was a ton of fun. They were all really excited because they knew that I'd worked on it for almost a year. So it was a big part of my career and like, life for a whole year. So it was very rewarding to get to watch it with them. And, my niece and nephew loved it. So that's a good feeling. I was like really excited that they loved it. I thought it was great. It was so fun and wacky and exactly the tone that I felt like it should have been. And it was so rewarding to kind of think about where the project was in the very beginning, and then seeing where it ended up and how much of a difference it was. It was not at all the same movie, but there were little elements here and there where I was like, oh, I remember when he drew that, a while ago, and it's still there. And there's like a glimmer of like, the dark kind of Avengers timeline that they were going to go for. But yeah, it was such a treat to get to see it finally. I would have loved to have seen it in the theater, but even at home, it was a great time. So it was great.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It really was. I think, like you say, for all those so many concepts thrown around, I think ultimately everything was just as it should have been. It was absolutely perfect. And I think, as you were saying, you did get that real kind of Scooby feel from it, and certainly an emotional ending. I know that even like 3-4 times in watching it, like both of us were still very emotional at how it ended. It was absolutely beautifully done. So it was incredible, and we really look forward to seeing your work in the future as well. So with that in mind, is there any projects coming up in the future that you're working on that you can share?
Yeah, so there are a few film projects that are out there that are coming that I can't really say, but you'll see them soon. And then I just finished writing and illustrating a book. It's called Barren Lands, and it's being published by Flesk Publishing. And it's about the American Southwest and some of the weird animals and plants that exist here. I was born and grew up in the Southwest, between New Mexico and California. So this book is kind of a love letter to some of the strange and creepy experiences I've had being an avid camper and hiker in these parts. So that's a big project that I'm really excited to release at the end of this year, I believe around October of 2023. So.
Oh, we'll definitely be sure to keep an eye on the progress of that, as well. I'm sure a lot of people watching this video right now. So for both us and people watching, where's the best place to keep up with all of the developments with what you're working on?
So the best place is probably Instagram. I post there quite a bit. I also have a Patreon. It's a good place to follow progress. I am also on Twitter. So those 3 avenues are great places to look. I keep a newsletter that you can sign up with on my website that has more exclusive looks at things I don't really post or share publicly. And then Patreon has a little bit of that too. So you can find it all under my name. Everything is /Brynn Metheney. So you can find it all that way.
Oh, that's incredible. I'll be sure to leave the links that we find in the description down below for people to keep up with that. And that wraps up all the questions that we had for you today. Just once more, thank you so much for coming on and the time you've given us and the incredible answers. There's definitely a lot that we'll be pondering upon for a while now. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It was an absolute joy to meet you both and to be here. And thanks so much for thinking of me and having me on.
Oh, that's okay. It's been an absolute honor, genuinely. And for people watching this, for the sake of wrapping up the video, thank you so much for watching another episode. If you want to keep up with what we're doing and future episodes, then I'll leave a link tree in the show notes. And yeah, for more, please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.